looking for the failure of, in this case, we're looking for a failure of buyers to tell us that the bearish fair value gap is strong, and that gives us the indication to take price lower, right? So one thing I look for again is I look for sudden switches of the delta at key levels, right? So this key level had a sudden switch. So we had 173 for 500, and then we had 638 for 277. Look at the switch. Look at this aggressive, rapid switch in the delta. This means that buyers are very, very quickly being changed to sellers, right? Lots of aggressive buyers have now been switched to aggressive sellers. Even here, 500 for only 99, massive switch from over here. So what does this tell us from a trading perspective? What does this tell us from an order flow perspective? Well, buyers have failed, buyers have failed, buyers have failed. So we've seen multiple buyers fail to drive price higher, and then we see a sudden shift to the downside. So this is on the 5-minute time frame. On the 1-minute time frame, you're able to use this information and catch sells from this level. And as you can see from here, the sellers were very much in control for the rest of the session. We had a massive move to the downside, and it all comes from understanding what is actually happening at those key levels. So this is something we discussed last session, where we looked at finished auctions and we looked at the order flow. Now, the other thing I want to introduce traders to is the volume, right? The volume is something we will go over in future lessons, but we're going to start off by understanding how the volume actually works. So the volume itself is another tool in the cluster settings. So if we go to the cluster settings, we go down and we add additional footprint. Let's go to the additional footprint and see what settings we have. Volume comes up as the first one, and we want to be looking at the volume profile. So what do we mean by volume, and what do we mean by volume profile? Well, it's very interesting to kind of break this down. The volume is essentially, it's very similar to the delta, but it's essentially the opposite sign. So the volume is the bid plus the ask, right? The volume tells you the total number of transactions hitting the market at that moment. And that's the secret with order flow. You're reading the transactions at that moment in price. And that's what allows you to determine in real time whether the price is going to move up and down. And you're not simply relying on wicks and bodies to determine the story of price, because those alone are never enough. But if we look at the volume over here, right, what we begin to see is very interesting, where if we break down this candle, a regular candle will not give you this information, but when you dive in deeper, you can see that a lot of volume is concentrated in the lower half of this candle, right? The upper half has a lot less volume, and you can see that with the profile, right? So the setting I've used over here in the ATAS platform is the additional footprint, right? So the volume profile essentially gives you the bid plus the ask, right? So if we just break down an example over here, 60 by 0, the delta is 60. The volume in this case is also 60 because it is 0 plus 60, right? A better example will be the one underneath, 134 plus 227, so that's 361. So the volume for that particular row, for that particular price, so for example, this price here is 62.5, right? So 62.5. The total number of transactions hitting that particular price was 361, right? We can tell by the delta that there were more aggressive buyers than they were aggressive sellers. Okay,